The former head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Sir Max Hill, says shoplifters should be spared jail to help tackle a backlog in the courts and overcrowded prisons. Joining me now is former police officer and director of Law and Order Foundation, Norman Brennan. Thanks for joining me, Norman. So, Norman, a couple of questions. Do you agree with the comments by Sir Max? And is it the case that, the shoplifters can now go and have a free-for-all because apparently they're not going to serve any kind of prison sentence for shoplifting?
Well, firstly, I disagree with the previous Crown Prosecution Service director. In fact, I think every single shoplifter should be charged with an offence, pretty much like when I first joined the police. We attended every single shoplifting offence. Unless there's an exceptional circumstances, like somebody literally is destitute and they were stealing perhaps just a small item to feed themselves and their family. But even then, they should be told in no uncertain terms that shoplifting is unacceptable. Last year, 16.7 million incidents. It's gone up by 8 million since 2022. There seems to be no deterrent whatsoever. The police rarely ever turn up to shopkeepers when they call the police. And we now have a free-for-all, and people feel that they can go into shops, any shops, and steal what they like. The security guards have got no power whatsoever, nor have any shopkeepers or shop staff. In fact, they're told not to interfere. Well, when that message is sent out, what message does that send out to shoplifters, most of whom are not people that are destitute? They're criminal gangs.
Yeah, and I think it's important to draw that distinction, that there's the criminal gangs. We've got some really serious footage on the screen at the moment where it's almost a riot of shoplifting taking place. And those people who, out of desperation, I was just telling my guest about, seeing a tin of baby milk on the floor in a supermarket where someone had gone in to take 2 tins of baby milk, to take the baby milk, and it had security tags on, so they dropped it. I mean, the fact that people are resorting to shoplifting for baby milk to feed a baby, and the footage that we've just seen of criminal gangs going in to steal, cigarettes, booze and other things is very different. Norman, tell us about something that happened to you, because you assisted the police, didn't you, with a shoplifting situation, and didn't you end up getting charged yourself?
Well, not charged. I live in Twickenham. I've lived here all my life, and I shop locally. And every shop I go into, I normally get to know the staff, speak to them, and there isn't a shop in my area that is not blighted by shoplifting, one of which is Sainsbury's by Twickenham Green. Well, most days I go down to Twickenham Green, I post, I primarily deal and oversee homicide, gun and knife crime again, which are out of control in Britain. But I recalled the police minister and the Prime Minister saying shoplifting is an epidemic. It needs to be challenged, and you should really help the staff and help stop it if you can. Well, I was parked up in my vehicle. I saw a suspect being chased by the shop manager of Sainsbury's, and he ran across the green, and he ran right in front of my car. Well, I'm a retired police officer. I know exactly what the situation was. So I followed the guy in my car. My knees are not as good as they once were when I was in a robbery squad. I really lost the suspect. So I couldn't run after him. So I pursued him, and at the same time, I called Scotland Yard. I needed backup. I hoped there was an officer locally, and he ran back across the green. He'd nicked 80 quid's worth of expensive wine. I don't really know if that's to feed him and his family. I certainly wouldn't be stealing wine if I was destitute anyway. As I followed him along the green, still speaking to the police, giving an update on the description, what the circumstances were, I came to a road called First Cross Road in Twickenham, which has a no entry sign. Until recently, it was a two-way road. Well, I'm an ex-police advanced driver, so I know how to drive. So I went through the no entry signs very, very slowly. The road was clear, the day was bright, the roads were dry. It's what we're taught in our driving courses, how to drive to accommodate the circumstances. To cut a long story short, I pursued him for another 1.5 miles. He ran into a housing, an industrial estate. By this time, 20 minutes later, police officers arrived. I said, he's in there, he'll be hiding. They went in, they found him, he was hiding in the bush, he was arrested. He refused to tell the police where any of the items were. So I went back over the route that I'd followed him, and I recovered 8 bottles of expensive broken wine. Well, the staff, probably advised by the police, refused to prosecute the individual. Because I went through a no entry sign, my car vehicle registration number was caught on Richmond Council CCTV, and I was issued with a fixed penalty. I appealed against it, telling me exactly what happened. They refused to accept it. I then went to the parking adjudicators in central London last week. All I had was mitigation, and Richmond Council were on the phone. They knew exactly the circumstances. They must know that our area is plagued with shoplifting, and I did what any decent member of the public would do, is challenge them. The adjudicator said, "You still wish to pursue this PCN against Mr. Brennan?" They said, "Yes, we do." Well, what message does that send when a retired police officer and one of Britain's leading law and order campaigners, that's privileged to do interviews like this, finds himself becoming the criminal, and the person he pursued, no further action was taken. Sainsbury's lost 80 quid. I spent hours actually appealing against this, and I've ended up basically being the criminal. The criminal justice system is on its head in this country.
Norman, that's quite a sobering story for anybody who was thinking that they might want to challenge or help out should they see somebody shoplifting. Norman, I didn't want to interrupt you then because it's a fascinating story, but I've run out of time. So thank you for joining me today. You really got your points over. Thank you. I'm going to talk to the panel now about that. There is this distinction. I mean, we're in a cost of living crisis. Some people are desperate. It's... you know, I know it's the saddest thing I've ever seen, seeing that dropped baby milk because they couldn't, all I could think of was a baby that was desperately in need of that. But by the other side of somebody stealing 8 bottles of wine, I would argue that it was expensive wine if it was 8 bottles. But, you know, somebody stealing wine that they were obviously stealing to sell, to make money on, which is completely different from somebody shoplifting. Not that any shoplifting should take place. I'm not justifying shoplifting. But what would you have done in Norman's situation?
I'd have probably done what Norman was doing if
I
I thought it could have helped. But having heard Norman's story now, I think I'd just sit there and be an active bystander, just let them get on with it and all the rest. But you know, shoplifting is a scourge. My wife works in retail, and the level of intimidation that comes from the shoplifters as they come into her store and her previous store. And the impact that has on the staff is shocking. And they don't see generally the individuals that are coming in who are stealing because they need to. And they turn a blind eye to that potentially. But it's the gangs that are coming in and those that are on drugs. And they've threatened store members with syringes and everything else. It is truly horrifying.
And so the advice from the police is towards shopkeepers and others is very similar to the advice that the police carry out themselves when they're attending demonstrations. It's an aggravated situation. Don't aggravate it. It's health and safety first. If you try and challenge them, if you try and stop them, you could be putting yourself in danger. But, you know, isn't that the role of the police? Wasn't that always the risk that you take when you sign up to the police? That you may one day be in danger, that you are facing risks? Isn't that what the role of being a police officer is? And it seems to me as though every time we talk about an operational situation, it's about keeping the police officer safe first.
Yeah, I completely agree. And by doing that, we've decriminalised lots of stuff, haven't we? And in this instance, shoplifting. You know, the fact is, that video that we were watching while you were talking to Norman of those kids, you know, pushing their way into a supermarket. You know, we're just kind of letting that happen, aren't we? And they know that they're going to get away with it. I mean, the story you tell about the baby formula is deeply sad, isn't it? And that sort of distinction needs to be maintained the whole time. But in most instances, we are talking about kind of organised crime, you know, who are going out and, like you say, nicking this stuff as a way of then going on to sell it. But we need the police to act. You know, we can't just, hand over this country to people who want to do the wrong thing. That isn't the point. And we don't want to put, you know, police officers' lives at risk, but they do need to intervene. And that story that Norman told, where he's now ended up as a criminal, is kind of baffling, isn't it? Like, what incentive is there then for anyone to try and stop this stuff?
But also the consequences are the same as they are for demonstrators. So the police are not taking action against demonstrators because for health and safety reasons they don't want to inflame a situation. So the demonstrators are coming out more and more. They're doing it frequently. They know they're not challenged. They're doing it. So they're like pushing the boundaries past back constantly. And it's the same with shoplifting. They know no one's going to challenge them. They know the police aren't going to come out. They know that the advice is just to stand back and let them get on with it. And so we're seeing a massive rise in shoplifting. It's no coincidence that, you know, because of the operational tactics of the police, we're seeing more and more of this bad behaviour. And there's no deterrent, is there? There's nothing to dissuade them from doing that.
No, what's the phrase, give an inch, take a mile? That's
Well,
kind
exactly.
of where we are, isn't it? That's
and that lack of immediate action is stimulating more and more and more activity. And the police are, and it's very easy to police bash, but they lack the resources to get into the real communities to deal with these, because a lot of the problems are with individuals and groups within communities and getting that understanding. So we do need to resource the police better to get back to community policing to be able to do this, as well as deal with all of the other more serious crimes that are elsewhere.
That's another problem, isn't it? That communities are far less cohesive than they used to be, and that's a big question. How do we make our communities more cohesive again? So